Ethan had never thought of himself as important. A human in a galaxy where humans were rare was already an unusual sight. But he had always believed in fairness and honesty, and in treating others with respect. That belief had brought him to this strange, magnificent empire, where alien architecture towered above clouds and ships from dozens of worlds filled the skies. Yet in this empire, humans were often laughed at, underestimated, and sometimes even humiliated. Ethan was about to find out just how far that humiliation could go. The council chamber was cold and grand, filled with golden pillars that reached the ceiling, reflecting light from alien lamps that shimmered with colors Ethan had no names for. The council members, creatures of many shapes and sizes, sat in judgment. Their eyes, some more than literal, scanned the room like predators assessing prey. Ethan could feel their doubt, their quiet amusement. He was about to be married to someone he had never met, a being chosen not for love but as a tool for humiliation. Lyra, the alien assigned to him, stood at the far end of the chamber. Her skin was smooth and silver, with eyes that shimmered like emeralds in the light. She wore a simple gown, modest in design, yet her posture and quiet confidence made her appear taller, more commanding than anyone else present. The council called her a slave, though from Ethan's perspective, there was nothing submissive about her presence. Even as she stood quietly, she held herself with dignity. The master of ceremonies, a tall, bird-like noble named Ericon, cleared his throat. "Today," he began, his voice echoing through the chamber, "we witness the joining of two beings, a human and an alien of servile status, to remind all that humans are easily controlled and that those below us in rank can be claimed as property." His words were meant to sting, and Ethan felt the sharp edge of mockery in the room. Whispers and murmurs rippled through the council chamber as some nobles smirked. Others laughed outright. Ethan swallowed hard. His heart raced, but he forced a calm expression. He had come here not to fight, not to rebel, but to survive and prove that humans had value even in an empire that scorned them. His gaze shifted to Lyra, who remained silent, her emerald eyes meeting his for the briefest moment. In that instant, he saw not fear but understanding, not submission but strength. The ceremony began. Strange words, alien sounds filled the chamber as the officiator recited the official decree. Ethan took a deep breath and stepped forward. Each step echoed loudly, a reminder of the eyes watching, judging. He extended his hand toward Lyra, unsure of how she would respond. To his surprise, she did not recoil. She extended her own hand gracefully, and their fingers met. There was no warmth yet, no familiarity. Only the quiet acknowledgement that they were now bound together by more than the council's decree. Ericon's voice rang out again, dripping with mockery. "Do you accept this alien as your spouse, human?" "I do," Ethan replied, his voice steady, surprising even himself. "And you, alien," Ericon continued, "do you accept this human?" Lyra's voice was calm, clear, and unlike anything Ethan had heard before. "I do," she said. The council seemed momentarily taken aback by the confidence in her tone. Ethan realized then that the ridicule was only as powerful as he allowed it to be. Lyra did not fear them. Why should he? The ceremony concluded and the crowd's laughter was loud, but Ethan noticed that Lyra remained composed, almost serene. They walked together toward the grand doors of the palace, and Ethan finally allowed himself a quiet glance at her. She was not a victim. She was a person, intelligent and capable. Perhaps she even understood the humiliation that had been planned, and perhaps she could teach him something about handling it. Their new home, a suite in the palace, was luxurious, but cold. It overlooked the city, a sprawling landscape of towers, bridges, and glowing streets. Ethan moved slowly, trying to absorb the enormity of what had just happened. Lyra followed, silent but attentive, observing the human and the palace alike. Once inside, Lyra finally spoke. Her voice was soft, but each word carried weight. "You do not belong to them, human. Do not let them convince you otherwise." Ethan was startled by the directness of her words. No one in the council had said anything like that. Their intention had been to shame him, and yet here was Lyra speaking the truth that even he had momentarily forgotten. I don't know how to start," he admitted. "I didn't even know you before this. How am I supposed to—" "Start by listening," Lyra interrupted gently. "We have both been forced into this situation. But forced does not mean weak. We can navigate it together." The human diplomat felt a spark of hope. Perhaps the council had underestimated not just him, but the potential in this union. Ethan nodded. Together, he repeated. Over the next few days, they explored the palace, learning about each other and their surroundings. Ethan discovered that Lyra was not only intelligent but highly skilled in diplomacy, strategy, and understanding other cultures. She had been a slave, yes, but her knowledge and capabilities had never been truly recognized by those who enslaved her. Ethan, in turn, showed Lyra the human approach, curiosity, courage, and a willingness to question unfair systems. He explained his vision, to be more than what the council wanted them to be, to prove that humans were capable of respect, honor, and leadership even in an alien world. Their conversations often lasted late into the night. At first they were cautious, polite, but gradually a mutual respect and understanding formed. Ethan noticed that the council's intended humiliation had begun to lose its power. While others still whispered, he and Lyra quietly prepared themselves for the future. One afternoon, a minor council member tried to provoke Ethan. "Do you realize what you've married?" "A servant, a nothing," he sneered. The chamber erupted in laughter, but Ethan remained calm. He looked at Lyra, who smiled faintly at him, a knowing smile that seemed to say, "Watch and learn." Ethan stood taller than usual. "She is more than you think," he said quietly, and that quiet voice carried farther than anyone expected. Murmurs replaced laughter. The council members' expression shifted, the first crack in their plan becoming visible. As days turned into weeks, Ethan and Lyra settled into a rhythm. They studied the empire, its people, and its politics. Ethan realized that this was not just about surviving humiliation. It was about learning, growing, and preparing for a future where humans, and those considered inferior, could stand equally alongside others. Lyra taught him patience and observation. Ethan shared human ingenuity and empathy. Together, they began to see the empire not as a place that mocked them, but as a world full of challenges waiting to be solved, problems waiting to be understood, and people waiting to be inspired. On one quiet evening, Ethan stood by the balcony overlooking the city. Lyra joined him silently, and for a moment they watched the lights shimmer in the alien night. Ethan realized that the marriage meant to humiliate him had instead given him something unexpected. An ally, a partner, and perhaps a friend who could change the course of his life. He smiled, just slightly, and Lyra noticed. "That's a good start," she said softly. "Yes," Ethan replied. "It is." And in that simple moment, amid the towering spires and glowing streets, the first seeds of a powerful bond were planted, one that no council, no ridicule, and no expectation could destroy. The mockery had begun, but so had their quiet revolution. The morning sun rose over the empire, casting golden light on towers and spires that stretched like fingers into the sky. Ethan and Lyra sat together in the breakfast hall of the palace, quietly observing the alien servants move gracefully, preparing their morning meals. Despite the luxury surrounding them, Ethan felt a weight in his chest. He had survived the mockery of the council, but the work ahead seemed even greater. He needed to find a way to turn humiliation into respect. Lyra, as always, noticed his concern. "You are thinking too much about what others believe," she said calmly, her silver skin shimmering softly in the light. "You cannot change their opinions overnight, but you can change what you do." Ethan nodded slowly. Her words were simple, but they carried power. She had been forced into a life of submission, yet she radiated confidence and wisdom. It was clear that the council had misjudged her, just as they had misjudged him. "Then what should we do first?" Ethan asked. Lyra's emerald eyes sparkled. "Observe, learn, listen, and act when the moment is right. Patience is a weapon." Over the next few days, Ethan and Lyra began exploring the palace and its surrounding city. They were careful not to draw too much attention, yet they listened to everything. Servants whispered about council intrigues. Merchants complained about trade laws that favored nobles. Citizens murmured about injustice. Everywhere they went, Ethan noticed one thing. The empire had problems and no one was solving them. One afternoon, while walking through the central market, a dispute erupted between two merchants. One claimed that the other had cheated in a trade deal. Ethan, accustomed to human diplomacy, stepped forward. "Perhaps there is a way to solve this fairly," he suggested. His voice carried confidence, calmness, and the tone of someone who genuinely wanted justice, not power. Lyra stood beside him. Listen to both sides, she advised. Then find a solution that benefits both, not just one. Together they mediated the dispute. They listened carefully, asked questions, and proposed a solution that satisfied both merchants. The crowd around them murmured in surprise. They had not expected a human and an alien slave to handle matters with such intelligence. Word spread quickly. By the next day, small delegations came to them for advice. One requested help with trade agreements, another with resource distribution. Each time, Ethan and Lyra worked together, blending human creativity with Lyra's deep knowledge of alien customs. Their successes were small but noticeable. Back at the palace, some council members were growing nervous. They had expected Ethan to fail, to be humiliated at every turn, yet he continued to succeed quietly. Even worse, Lyra was proving herself invaluable. She understood alien customs, knew languages, and could negotiate with creatures the council had dismissed. One evening, Ethan and Lyra studied the Empire's trade records. Ethan pointed to a set of irregularities. These routes favor the nobles too much. The common merchants lose out. We could adjust this to benefit everyone and still keep the nobles happy. Lyra's eyes widened in agreement. Yes, and if we show that the change improves the Empire, it will be hard for anyone to oppose it. They presented their plan to the council. Ethan spoke first, outlining the benefits clearly using logic and fairness. Lyra followed, adding her insight into alien cultures and their expectations. The council listened, some skeptically, some intrigued. When they concluded, a silence filled the chamber. Then slowly, murmurs of approval began. One council member, a tall reptilian figure named Krell, leaned forward. "You may have a point," he admitted reluctantly. This could indeed benefit the Empire. It was the first crack in the wall of prejudice that had surrounded them. Ethan and Lyra smiled at each other quietly, knowing this was only the beginning. As days turned into weeks, they began to develop a unique partnership. Ethan admired Lyra's intelligence and her ability to remain calm under pressure. Lyra appreciated Ethan's courage and willingness to challenge the council's assumptions. Together, they were more than just human and alien. They were a team, capable of solving problems that had baffled the Empire for years. Their partnership was not without challenges. One morning, a young noble named Vryn attempted to embarrass Ethan during a public gathering. "Do you really think a human can understand our ways?" he sneered. "And your companion, a slave? How amusing." Ethan felt the familiar sting of mockery, but this time it did not break him. He looked at Lyra, who gave him a subtle nod. Her presence reminded him that he was not alone. "Perhaps you underestimate us," Ethan said calmly. "But we will show that wisdom and fairness are not limited to birth or rank." Vryn laughed, expecting the crowd to join in. But Ethan and Lyra calmly demonstrated a new system for resource sharing that improved efficiency and fairness. By the end of the day, the crowd applauded. Not for Ethan, not for Lyra, but for the results they achieved. Vryn was left speechless, and whispers of admiration began to circulate. Ethan and Lyra's success was not only practical but symbolic. They were living proof that a human and a former slave could contribute more than some of the Empire's most privileged nobles. Their alliance, once forged out of humiliation, was becoming a symbol of intelligence, fairness, and respect. At night, they often discussed the Empire's future. "We can do more than just survive," Lyra said one evening. "We can inspire change. The council underestimated us because they did not see our potential, but now we have the chance to prove it." Ethan nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. "Yes. And if we work together, we can show the Empire that prejudice and mockery are weaknesses, not strengths." Lyra smiled faintly. "Exactly. Let them doubt. Let them mock. Our work will speak louder than their words." As weeks passed, they began to gain supporters, small factions within the Empire, tired of unfair practices and rigid traditions, quietly aligned with Ethan and Lyra. People began to see the human not as a joke, nor the alien as a slave, but as leaders who combined courage, wisdom, and fairness. One day, the Emperor's advisors called Ethan to discuss a serious trade disagreement with a neighboring planet. Lyra accompanied him. They reviewed the facts carefully, proposed solutions, and negotiated agreements that maintained peace and prosperity for both worlds. Their success spread through the Empire, and the whispers of mockery were replaced with murmurs of respect. Back at the palace, Ethan reflected on the journey so far. The council had thought to humiliate him by marrying him to Lyra, expecting failure, embarrassment, and ridicule. Yet in their unity they had found strength. In facing humiliation together, they had forged trust and respect, and in their work, they were beginning to show that humans, thought weak and inferior, could change the course of the empire. Lyra approached him quietly that evening. "You have grown stronger," she said softly. "Not just because of me, but because you chose to rise above their expectations. That is the mark of a true human." Ethan felt a warmth he had never known in this empire. It was not pride nor arrogance, but the quiet joy of finding an ally, a partner, and a shared purpose. "And you," he replied, "have shown me that strength can come from anyone, regardless of how the world labels them." They stood together, looking out over the city, imagining a future where intelligence, fairness, and courage mattered more than birth, rank, or prejudice. The council's plan to humiliate them had failed, but their real journey was just beginning. The galaxy was vast, full of challenges, but together, they felt ready to face it all. Each small victory, each act of fairness and wisdom was a step toward changing not only their own lives, but the lives of everyone in the empire. And while some still doubted them, Ethan and Lyra knew that unity, respect, and courage could turn mockery into admiration and humiliation into triumph. In the quiet of the palace, they shared a simple moment of understanding. They had been forced together, yes, but their alliance was no longer imposed, it was chosen. And in that choice, they found a power far greater than any council's mockery. They were no longer just a human and an alien slave. They were partners, equals, and slowly, the galaxy was beginning to take notice. The city of Arendor sparkled beneath twin suns as Ethan and Lyra walked through its busy streets. Citizens of countless species hustled between markets, workshops, and skyports. Yet many paused to watch the human and his alien companion pass by. Their reputation had begun to grow quietly, whispers spreading about a human who dared to stand tall and an alien who carried herself with unmatched grace. Ethan, once fearful of ridicule, now felt a quiet pride. He had learned from Lyra that confidence came not from words but from actions, and each success, no matter how small, chipped away at the council's plan to humiliate him. The morning had started with a simple visit to a neighboring district, where a trade disagreement had caused merchants to withhold goods. Ethan and Lyra approached the market with calm determination. The merchants were skeptical at first. After all, a human and a former slave had never been entrusted with such matters before. But as Ethan spoke, outlining fair solutions and explaining the benefits for everyone, heads began to nod. Lyra translated complex alien regulations for those who needed guidance, her voice steady and assured. By the end of the day, the dispute was resolved peacefully. "This is different," one merchant whispered to his neighbor. "Never have humans been so wise. And that alien, she speaks with authority we can understand." Ethan smiled faintly at Lyra. "We're making progress," he said. Lyra nodded, slowly but steadily. Change does not come overnight. Back at the palace, the council met to discuss their growing concern. Some members whispered furiously among themselves, while others watched Ethan and Lyra's rising influence with unease. "This was not supposed to happen," muttered Krell, the reptilian counselor. "They were meant to fail." Another noble, a glowing winged figure named Sariel, frowned. "They are not just surviving, they are improving things. And worse, people respect them for it." Indeed, word of their successes had spread far beyond the city. Reports arrived from distant colonies praising Ethan and Lyra for fairness, wisdom, and efficiency. Even creatures who had long distrusted humans were beginning to reconsider their assumptions. Ethan and Lyra were not seeking recognition. They cared only about solving problems and helping others. But recognition followed them, as it always does when people act with integrity and skill. One afternoon, a young diplomat approached them with a delicate issue. Two planets previously at odds over water resources were on the brink of a serious conflict. The council had failed repeatedly to mediate, and now tensions threatened trade and safety. Ethan studied the reports carefully. "If we can show both sides the benefits of sharing and mutual respect, we can prevent conflict without forcing either planet to compromise unfairly," he said. Lyra added, "I can speak to the representatives in their native languages and explain the customs and expectations that they might not understand about each other. This is diplomacy, not domination." Together they traveled to the neutral meeting station, a sleek spaceport hovering above the glowing planet Viridian. The representatives were skeptical. They had been invited by the council before, and every prior attempt had ended in mistrust and tension. Now a human and a so-called alien slave were attempting the impossible. Ethan and Lyra listened. They asked questions. They encouraged dialogue. Slowly, the representatives began to see that the humans and aliens present were not seeking control, but understanding. Lyra explained the nuances of each culture with clarity, while Ethan proposed fair compromises. By the third day, both planets agreed to a shared water system with oversight committees composed of representatives from both worlds. The success was unprecedented. The Council's previous failures were contrasted sharply against Ethan and Lyra's achievements. Word of this accomplishment traveled back to Arendor quickly. Citizens cheered quietly in the streets when they heard of the resolution. Merchants praised their wisdom. Even the council members could not hide their grudging respect. Back in the palace, Ethan and Lyra discussed their next steps. "We are proving that the council's mockery was meaningless," Ethan said. "But there are still many who doubt us." Lyra agreed. "Yes, and those doubts will not vanish overnight. We need to continue our work, quietly and steadily, so that no one can ignore the truth." Their next challenge came unexpectedly. A high-ranking noble named Vryn, who had attempted to embarrass Ethan before, devised a subtle plan to undermine them. He spread rumors that Lyra had used her knowledge unfairly to manipulate negotiations. Some citizens believed it, some council members were concerned. Ethan felt frustration, but Lyra reminded him, "Ignore the lies. Focus on truth, on results. Truth cannot be hidden forever." Ethan took her advice to heart. They held a public session where they openly reviewed their methods and decisions. They explained each choice they had made, each step of the negotiations, and how fairness had been maintained. Transparency silenced many critics, while those still skeptical had little reason to oppose them. The people began to trust them more. They were no longer just a human and an alien. They were symbols of fairness, intelligence, and unity. Small gestures of respect became more frequent. A merchant offered them gifts of thanks. Children waved from balconies. Citizens stopped whispering insults and instead asked for advice. Ethan and Lyra realized that respect could be earned not through fear or force, but through action, courage, and wisdom. The council had tried to humiliate them, but their work had turned mockery into admiration. One evening, as they reviewed plans for a new education initiative, Lyra smiled. "Do you see it? People are starting to see humans differently. They are beginning to understand that strength comes in many forms." Ethan nodded, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. "And they are starting to see that everyone, no matter their background, has value. That is something even the council cannot take away." Their bond grew stronger with each success. They celebrated small victories privately, sharing quiet conversations about hope, future plans, and dreams. Ethan found himself learning more about alien cultures from Lyra than any human scholar could have taught him. Lyra in turn admired Ethan's ingenuity, his courage to face ridicule, and his unwavering belief in fairness. But it was not just about recognition. They were changing the empire in ways no one had imagined. Citizens began to question old traditions. Merchants and officials sought advice from them. Even some council members approached them privately, acknowledging the value of their insight. The greatest change, however, was within themselves. Ethan had started as a human forced into humiliation, uncertain of his place. Now he was confident, respected, and aware of his abilities. Lyra had once been labeled a slave, dismissed as unimportant. Now she was valued for her intelligence, her guidance, and her courage. Together they were more than the sum of their parts. They were a team capable of achieving remarkable things. As another busy day ended, they stood together on a balcony overlooking the bustling city. The twin suns dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange, violet, and silver. Citizens moved below, unaware of how close they were to witnessing history in the making. Lyra spoke softly. "We have shown that humans and those once considered weak can accomplish great things. But this is only the beginning." Ethan looked at her, gratitude in his eyes. "Together we can do even more. We can change minds, inspire others, and show that courage, wisdom, and fairness matter more than status or birth." She nodded. "Yes, and when we do, no one will dare underestimate either of us again." The night air was calm yet full of promise. Ethan and Lyra knew that challenges would continue, that skeptics still remained, and that the council's influence could not be ignored. But for the first time, they were no longer afraid. They had grown stronger together, learning from each other, teaching each other, and slowly inspiring an entire empire to see humans and aliens in a new light. In that moment, Ethan felt a quiet pride. The humiliation he had faced had sparked something greater, a partnership built on respect, courage, and intelligence. He smiled at Lyra, and she smiled back. Together, they were rising, not just above mockery, but above expectation. The empire would never be the same. The palace felt different that morning. The sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting patterns on the polished floor. Ethan and Lyra moved together through the halls, their presence now familiar to the palace staff and even some nobles. While whispers of mockery had once followed them, those whispers were fading, replaced by cautious respect. Yet the council still sought to maintain control. Many nobles had grown anxious as Ethan and Lyra continued to succeed in diplomacy, trade, and public welfare. It was clear, their unity and wisdom were changing the balance of power. "Do you think they will stop trying to undermine us?" Ethan asked as they entered the strategy room. Lyra shook her head. "No. Those who cling to old traditions fear change. They will resist until they cannot. We must act carefully." Their next challenge arrived swiftly. A dispute had broken out in the outer colonies over access to rare minerals vital for energy production. The council had failed repeatedly to mediate, and tensions threatened trade and safety. Ethan and Lyra were called to resolve the issue. They arrived at the colony headquarters, a cluster of buildings perched on a rocky plateau. Alien representatives greeted them, skeptical of the human and his companion. "We have heard of your success," one elder said. "But can a human truly understand our needs?" Ethan bowed slightly. "I may not know everything," he said, "but I promise to listen carefully and work toward a solution fair for all parties." Lyra stepped forward. "And I will explain the concerns and expectations of each group so that no misunderstanding remains." The negotiations began. Tension filled the room as representatives voiced grievances, complaints, and suspicions. Ethan and Lyra listened attentively, asked questions, and suggested solutions. Slowly, their patience and fairness won over even the most doubtful delegates. By the third day, a compromise was reached. Resources would be shared proportionally. With oversight councils, including members from each colony, the colonies agreed enthusiastically, impressed by the fairness of the plan. Ethan and Lyra's ability to solve the problem where the council had failed made news across the empire. Back in the palace, the council could no longer deny their achievements. Some nobles quietly supported their initiatives, hoping to align themselves with this rising influence. Others, still fearful, attempted subtle sabotage. But Ethan and Lyra anticipated most actions, using transparency and fairness to neutralize deception. One evening, Lyra turned to Ethan as they reviewed plans for educational reform. "We are making the empire better, but we must inspire confidence too. People must see the value of cooperation, not just efficiency." Ethan nodded. "We need to show that intelligence and fairness are stronger than fear and prejudice." They organized a series of public forums across the capital. Citizens, merchants, and young leaders gathered to discuss governance, trade, and cultural exchange. Ethan and Lyra facilitated these forums with clarity and patience. They encouraged questions, valued opinions, and offered solutions that considered everyone's needs. The response was overwhelming. People began to see them not as outsiders or as symbols of mockery, but as leaders whose integrity and vision could guide the empire. Teachers, merchants, and officials approached them with ideas for improvement. Children looked up to them as examples of courage and intelligence. Even some council members could not hide their admiration. Krell, once one of their fiercest critics, approached Ethan privately. "You have done what I thought impossible," he admitted. "You have changed the way people see humans. And your companion. She has proven herself beyond doubt." Ethan smiled but remained humble. "It is not about proving anything to them," he said. "It is about showing what is fair and right. That is all any of us should strive for," Lyra added softly. "And it works because we act with honesty and care. Power without integrity is meaningless." Word spread beyond the capital. Other cities and colonies began requesting assistance from Ethan and Lyra. They were asked to mediate disputes, advise on policies, and teach methods of cooperation. The once humiliated human and the former slave were now seen as symbols of wisdom and unity. As the months passed, Ethan realized the transformation they had inspired. The Empire had begun to shift from rigid hierarchy and prejudice toward fairness and respect for talent, no matter the species. Mockery had been replaced with admiration. Fear had been replaced with hope. And in every success, Ethan saw the proof that humans could excel anywhere, even among the most advanced alien societies. One night, standing on the balcony of their palace suite, Ethan looked out at the city lights shimmering below. Lyra joined him silently, her presence steady and reassuring. "Do you see it?" she asked. "The Empire is changing. We have shown that intelligence, fairness, and courage can overcome mockery and prejudice." Ethan nodded. "Yes, and we are only beginning. The future will be better if we continue to act wisely and inspire others." Lyra smiled faintly. "Then let us keep moving forward. Together there is nothing we cannot achieve." As the twin moons rose above the skyline, Ethan and Lyra knew their work was far from over. Challenges would continue, but the Empire had already begun to recognize their value. And in their partnership, they had found not only strength but purpose, courage, and hope. The once humiliated human and the former slave had begun to turn mockery into triumph. And soon the entire galaxy would take notice. Years passed, and the changes Ethan and Lyra had inspired became permanent. The Empire was no longer a place where ridicule and hierarchy determined worth. Instead, intelligence, fairness, and cooperation guided decisions. Their partnership had become legendary. Ethan had grown in confidence and respect. Once mocked and underestimated, he was now recognized as a capable diplomat and leader. Lyra, too, had risen in stature, not just as his companion but as a respected figure in her own right. The council, once eager to humiliate them, now sought their advice. Their work had extended beyond diplomacy. They created programs for education, trade reform, and cultural understanding. Children across the Empire studied their methods, learning that intelligence and integrity were more valuable than birth or status. One day, a delegation from a distant system arrived with a problem involving environmental balance and energy supply. Ethan and Lyra listened, studied, and devised a plan that satisfied all parties while protecting natural resources. Their reputation for fairness and wisdom grew with each successful endeavor. The citizens' admiration was not only for their skills, but for the example they set. Ethan and Lyra showed that anyone, regardless of species or past, could contribute meaningfully. Respect and trust replaced fear and mockery, yet even in triumph they remained humble. Ethan often reminded Lyra, "Our achievements are not just ours. They belong to everyone who chooses to act fairly and wisely." Lyra nodded. "And the best part is, each small change inspires another. The Empire grows stronger not because of us, but because of what we encourage in others." The council had also transformed. Many former skeptics now embraced reform, recognizing that clinging to old traditions had been a weakness, not a strength. The Empire was learning that unity, collaboration, and fairness were far more powerful than ridicule or fear. Ethan and Lyra's bond had grown deeper over the years. The forced marriage that had begun as humiliation had become a true partnership, built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. They celebrated successes quietly, savoring the knowledge that their efforts had made a real difference. One evening, standing on a palace balcony overlooking the capital, Ethan turned to Lyra. "Do you remember when we were first married? How they tried to humiliate me?" Lyra smiled. "Yes, and we turned it into something far greater than they could have imagined." Ethan laughed softly. "I never thought that a human and a so-called slave could change an entire empire. Yet here we are." "And it was never about proving them wrong," Lyra said gently. "It was about proving to ourselves what humans and others are capable of when given a chance." The city below glittered like stars brought to the ground. Citizens moved freely, merchants traded fairly, and children played without fear or prejudice. The Empire had become a place where everyone could aspire, contribute, and thrive. Ethan took Lyra's hand. "We've come a long way," he said. Lyra squeezed it. "And we will continue. There are still challenges ahead, but now we face them as equals with courage and wisdom." The palace bells rang, echoing across the city. It was a sound of celebration, not mockery. The Empire honored those who acted with integrity and skill, regardless of background. And Ethan and Lyra, once targets of humiliation, now stood as symbols of hope, change, and harmony. In the quiet of the evening, Ethan and Lyra watched the sun set over the horizon. The galaxy stretched endlessly beyond the palace walls, full of possibilities. Together, they had shown that intelligence, courage, and fairness could overcome prejudice. They had turned ridicule into admiration, humiliation into triumph, and a forced marriage into a partnership that inspired an entire empire. The story of Ethan and Lyra became a legend, reminding everyone that true strength comes not from status or wealth, but from character, courage, and the ability to lift others. And as they stood side by side, smiling at the world they had helped shape, it was clear. The galaxy had never seen a team like them, and never would forget.